Welcome. I'm Beth Flynn-Ferry, the Executive Director of CAHRS. I'd like to welcome you to our fifth CAHRS webcast for 2023. I'm joined today by Brad Bell, the William J. Conity Professor of Strategic HR in the ILR School at Cornell, and Brad is also the Academic Director of CAHRS. Technological advances, most notably in the area of artificial intelligence, are shaping not only the future of work, but also the HR function. Companies are racing to identify potential use cases for new technologies, as well as to better understand how they may impact HR strategies and service delivery. In late October, we held our annual fall partner meeting here on campus, in which over 70 attendees from our CAHRS partner companies came together to hear presentations from Boeing, Accenture, IBM, and Workday, as well as several Cornell faculty that focused on the impact of technology on the future of work in the function. It was a fun, full day of discussion that produced many valuable insights. And since many of our members were unable to travel to Ithaca for the in-person meeting, we put together this webcast so we could share some of the key takeaways that emerged from the meeting. So here's our plan for the next 30 minutes. We'll start by sharing some of the insights that emerged from the partner meeting. I'll ask Brad to summarize his key takeaways, and we'll spend some time discussing them. Our goal is not to summarize the meeting in detail. We will be putting together a written summary that does just that. Rather, we want to call attention to a few key lessons that we personally found most interesting and impactful throughout that day. And throughout the presentation, we encourage you to share your comments and questions using the Q&A function or chat function in Zoom. We'll reserve a few minutes at the end of today's sessions to answer those questions. So at this point, Brad, I'll turn it over to you to start highlighting some of your thoughts from the meeting.
Great. Thanks, Beth. And thanks to all of you for joining us today. You know, as Beth alluded to in her opening remarks, there are a ton of valuable insights that emerged during the partner meeting, many more than we have time to cover today. So rather than really try to provide a comprehensive summary of the meeting, my goal is to really highlight a few of the themes that really stood out to me and us as we listened to the various presenters. What I thought I would do, in fact, is to highlight what I saw as a number of different tensions that were highlighted across the different presenters throughout the day. And as I discuss these, Beth, obviously feel free to jump in and share your own thoughts and questions. So jumping right in, you know, I think one of the themes that clearly emerged during the day was both the potential opportunities, but also the risks that are associated with these emerging technologies, most notably artificial intelligence. You know, for example, on the positive side, these technologies can really give us the data and insights needed to serve as true business leaders and to unlock the potential that exists across all areas of HR, from talent acquisition to learning to the employee experience. At the same time, it's clear that we need to wrestle with a number of different challenges and risks related to bias, privacy, and transparency, as well as the overall risk that over-reliance on these various technological tools may reduce the personal human element of HR that we all value and know is such an important aspect of the function. So how do we realize these opportunities while also making sure that we can mitigate some of these risks that are associated with these technologies? According to the presentations throughout the day, the key is really ensuring that these technologies are used in conjunction with human judgment as well as human expertise in the area of HR. So this kind of, first tension I put up against, machine versus human, I think it's often the way we think about these technologies at first glance. But what was really insightful to me as we listened to the various presenters is I think it's less a question of machine versus human and more of a question around machine and human, and how do we really align what we do in HR with the potential that these technologies hold. And so it'll really be incumbent among all of us working in the HR function to oversee these tools and to decide when and how they can be used to do the most good and the least amount of harm. I think this will require some evolution of the function and also the competencies required among HR professionals. For example, I think one thing we heard throughout the day is really the importance of HR professionals becoming familiar and comfortable with these technologies. Not to say that all of a sudden we're going to get into computer science or the nitty-gritty of designing these tools, but really to have a familiarity and a comfort with using them and being able to think through the different use cases within our organizations. I think it will also require increased partnership between HR and other stakeholders within our organizations, most notably IT, legal, come to mind, really to think about how we can set up appropriate guardrails and guidelines about the use of these tools. I think it will also likely place a premium on HR professionals' analytics capability as the demand for database decision really grows exponentially as these tools have the opportunity to provide us with, to sort through data and to provide us with insights and recommendations. Moving on to our second theme, it follows somewhat from this first theme and is really focused on this differentiation between automation and augmentation. Although I think many organizations will undoubtedly be attracted to the efficiencies that can be gained through automation, one thing we heard virtually from every presenter throughout the partner meeting was that the real value creation from tools like AI will really come from augmentation as opposed to automation. And again, this has important implications for HR because it really means that we need to align tech strategy with our HR strategy.
I agree, Brad. I thought too that the augmentation versus automation distinction was really important. Takeaway from several of the presenters. How do you think companies can best implement an augmentation strategy?
Yeah, I think it's a good question, Beth. I think what we heard from a number of the different presenters was starting with a use case or a problem or a need that really needs to be solved within the organization. I think at the heart of that, what we heard was really putting the kind of employee experience front and center. And I think, making that a little bit more concrete, I think that involves a few different things. First, really understanding from the employee perspective, what is a practical need or a pain point that can be addressed through technology. I think second is really making sure that we incorporate employees' voice from the beginning in terms of designing the solution. They're the ones that really understand the work and are in the best position to help us to assess and understand the problem that we're solving for. And I think they can also serve a valuable role in terms of providing feedback that can be used to continuously update and refine the solution over time. Again, I think we're pretty early days with the application of some of these tools, so they're usually not perfect, right out of the box, so to speak. So I think there's a lot of kind of learning, adjustment, and continuous improvement that needs to occur over time. So I think it's really important to continuously get the input and the voice of employees so we can understand, how they're using the tools, where they're maybe not working so well, and where we can tweak them and improve them to really enhance their impact. And so I think that the underlying kind of theme that really stood out is similar to much of what we do in HR is really to create a process that has both top-down and bottom-up inputs, meaning, thinking about it from the organizational and leadership standpoint about what we're trying to drive, but also making sure that we're getting that input from our employees so we can come to, alignment around what these solutions should look like.
Thanks, Brad.
I think, again, a related theme that we heard, and it kind of goes with this idea of, this isn't going to be perfect in, version 1. I think a lot of the suggestions that we heard from various presenters was around, getting out there, playing with the tools, trying things out, experimenting. And certainly I think we can all resonate with the underlying thought behind that, right? If we sit back and we wait till things are perfect, we'll probably get left behind. But I think it also creates an interesting tension between, how quickly should we be moving so that we don't kind of fall behind, but also making sure that we're not moving so quickly that we're potentially creating harm within our organizations. given that obviously in our case, these tools are going to be directly impacting our employees and their livelihoods. And so I think this is a question that the field will really be wrestling with for some time. I think in the near term, what we're seeing is that companies are addressing this tension really by thinking about where can we leverage these tools where even if things go a bit off the rails, they're really not going to create much harm. For example, I think we're seeing them utilized largely in terms of a lot of administrative tasks, creating job descriptions, for example, where if a job description gets messed up, it's something we can easily fix. It's not going to be the end of the world. Or, even in terms of kind of tier one employee support, if an employee needs to escalate that to human, intervention, they're able to do that if they don't get the answer they need, at tier one through a chatbot, so to speak. So I think what we're seeing is that companies are being somewhat cautious in terms of where they're really leveraging these tools and are avoiding some of those high stakes situations where you could really see more adverse impact, such as in cases of hiring and talent acquisition, in terms of performance management, in terms of rewards decisions. Certainly there's some companies that are leveraging these tools in those spaces, but I think they tend to currently be more the exception than the norm as companies really seek to move a little bit more cautiously in this space. A fourth theme that emerged during the day is really the importance of zooming out from the individual. And so I kind of had set this up as, moving from the micro to the macro. Understandably, I think a lot of the attention to date has really been around how the adoption of these new technologies is going to impact individual workers, right? A lot of the discussion, for example, is about, is this going to lead to job and employee displacement? Those types of issues have really come to the forefront, and those are certainly important. What I thought was really interesting, though, is many of the presenters also kind of took the lens up a level or two to really think about, what is the impact of these technologies on teams, as well as our organizations, and even more broadly, society at large. For example, one of the presenters, Malti Young, who's in our information science and computer science division here at Cornell, he shared some research that he's done looking at, as individuals interact with algorithms and AI in kind of an interpersonal way, how does that impact their interpersonal reactions with other humans and in their teams? And it's found that, we kind of develop these patterns as we interact with a Siri or an Alexa. We're very demanding, we're very curt, not the way we usually talk to one another, yet, that can create a certain routine or pattern that then spills over to how we interact with one another. And so I think that was a really important insight to think about, what might be those kind of norms and expectations about human interaction that get shaped by how we interact with these technologies. Some of the other presenters also highlighted that it's very difficult to design these various tools in a way that really maximizes utility across these different levels. What might be good for the individual, for example, isn't always what's good for the organization or what's good for society. And one of our presenters talked about this idea of a two-sided market. I think when we go to places like Amazon, we kind of, I think, intuitively understand that. We know that the algorithms are maybe pushing certain products to us, or we see sponsored items, and we know that there's kind of an intent, so to speak, to manipulate our buying. I personally had never really thought about that in the HR context, but I think some of the presenters highlighted that sometimes the way we might set up certain algorithms to help us, for example, identify the best candidate might be good for the organization, but when we really kind of zoom out and look at that from a societal level, maybe in the aggregate, that's not creating the greatest good. So I think that really means that we need to think across these different levels as we think about these tools and really think about, what impact are they having on individual workers? What impact are they likely to have on our teams and team dynamics? What impact are they likely to have on the organization? and even thinking about, societally, what impact are they likely to have? And I think that's a tall task, obviously, but I think it's one that we need to keep working through.
Good point. And I know you study groups and teams, so I'm wondering, how do you think about technologies such as AI and how they will impact teams going forward? Do you think they'll improve them or hurt teams and collaboration?
Yeah, I think it's a good question, Beth, because I think prior to the partner meeting, I had always kind of thought about these tools as ways to really enhance teamwork and team dynamics. A good example is I've done some research recently looking at communication within teams. And one of the things that we often find is that teams that have relatively equal levels of voice across team members tend to be the highest performing teams. And we can look at that pretty granularly in terms of, is the kind of turn taking and speaking in the team relatively consistent or equally distributed among the team. And interestingly, now there's these tools coming online that can help teams in real time monitor kind of speaking turns. And if, one or a few members are dominating the conversation, the tool will kind of prompt the team to correct that and, try to balance things out. So I'd always viewed these tools as having more of an upside than a downside. But I think some of the presenters like Malti really made me realize that there can be a dark side to some of these tools. And we really need to think about how they're going to maybe spill over and influence our interactions, or as teams, do we start relying on them too much and maybe move away from kind of self-managing our teams ourselves? So again, I think it was a good kind of callback to some of the theme that I started out with today, which is, there's both opportunities, but there's risks. And I think we always need to have both of those sides of the coin in mind as we think about applying these tools. So one more theme I'm going to highlight, and then would love to answer any questions or respond to any kind of thoughts or comments that any of you joining us today might have. The last theme is that emerged during the meeting is really about the effect of these technologies on job skills. There's a lot of debate out there, and some of this even showed up during the meeting about, what is AI and these other technologies? What are they going to really mean for job displacement? Are they going to create more jobs? Are they going to lead to fewer jobs, or maybe not have, much of an impact at all? Although there's a lot of debate around that question, I think there's very little debate about the fact that it's going to mean major changes for many jobs, particularly white-collar jobs. And I recently was talking to an HR leader, and they made an interesting comment that stuck with me. They said, robotics is to blue-collar workers what AI is to white-collar workers, meaning I think the disruption that we're likely to see in AI is largely going to be in the white-collar space, and really kind of going to reshape those jobs, much more saliently. And so, I think when we know that when jobs change, sometimes they get better and sometimes they get worse. And so I think HR will really play an important role in making sure that these changes move in a positive direction. For example, I think by focusing on reskilling and upskilling, HR can really ensure that workers are prepared to navigate these changes and are able to take on new responsibilities to ensure that their jobs remain, enriching, engaging, and really meaningful at the end of the day. And so I think, again, this was an example of where we can think of these tools as having kind of direct impact on kind of HR processes and practices, whether it's, again, talent acquisition or performance management. But there's also these kind of secondary impacts as it reshapes work, as it changes jobs and skills. I think these will also be key areas for those of us in HR to really be working on and focusing on as well. So with that, we'd love to take any questions that any of you joining us today might have. I think we've seen a few come in already. If you have others, please do submit them, and we can field those here.
Thanks, Brad, for highlighting those various themes. It's clear that HR has a lot to wrestle with when it comes to the impact of these new technologies. As you mentioned, we have a couple questions that have come in, so let me direct those to you. So one question is, you suggested that analytics capability will become even more important in the context of these new tools and technology. Why is that?
Yeah, it's a good question, Beth. I think one of the last presentation of the day, actually by Workday, I thought really highlighted this issue well. And they talked about you kind of used the analogy of throwing darts at a dartboard. And I think a lot of times in HR, we might know that there's an issue or a problem, but we're not really sure about what is the root cause, what is the action that we can really take to fix it. And so at the end of the day, we end up throwing a lot of darts to eventually hit the bullseye and fix that issue. And I think what the Workday presentation highlighted is that these tools have the potential to really give us a lot more data-driven insights into what is the real problem or issue, what are the potential solutions or levers that we can pull to fix those issues, and help us to really laser in with very focused interventions for various employee issues. That sounds great, but I think also what it's going to require among HR professionals is really a much deeper level of analytics skills for a few reasons. One is, I think we're still going to have to know what the right questions to ask. These tools and systems, they're only as good as the prompts or questions that we ask them for in the first place. So I think really being able to kind of think through critically what are those questions or issues that we should really be probing and asking in the first place is going to be key. I think the second one is we really need to be able to interpret and evaluate the insights that these tools provide us. I don't think we can just take them at face value, particularly at this early stage of the game. And so we know there's examples out there, for example, where these tools have generated blatantly false or fabricated responses to prompts. And so I think we're going to have the analytics capability to really dig in, to be able to analyze the solutions or recommendations that it's providing, to be able to evaluate the credibility of those, and to decide how they should or whether they should be really acted upon in our organizations. And so all of these, I think, are kind of core aspects of analytics in terms of being able to ask the right questions, being able to really draw out insights from data, really being able to figure out how to translate those into recommendations. And so I think it's going to place a higher premium on those types of analytical skills among HR professionals going forward.
But we'll be lucky to have the chatbots and the AI tools crunching the data for us. So
that is true.
Yeah. Another question here. You talked about the importance of upskilling in navigating the effects of AI on jobs. How big a change is this? And hasn't HR always engaged in upskilling and reskilling as jobs have changed?
Yeah, I think it's fair. I think we even heard some presentations throughout the day that provided examples, going back to the auto workers in the 90s and 80s, and examples of robotics where we saw some of these same issues that we're wrestling with today show up. And so I don't think the issue of kind of reskilling or upskilling is necessarily new. But I think also one of the presentations during the day that I thought was great was from Accenture, really talking about what's it take to become a skills-based organization. And I think that's the shift that we're seeing organizations thinking about today, less so around, how do we reskill one job, or how do we upskill this group of employees? I think given the rapid pace of change, we're really seeing organizations think about, should we be moving to really skills as our kind of operating currency in today's environment? And that I don't think is a trivial shift. I think we heard again from Accenture, for example, that to become truly a skills-based organization, you really need to put skills at the core of everything HR does. You can't just use it for talent acquisition, or you can't just use skills for development. you really need to think about it across the entire employee life cycle. You know, we're going to focus on skills as we hire, we're going to focus on skills as we manage performance, as we develop, as we reward, you know, et cetera. So really needs to be threaded across all of HR and really needs to be at the core for it to really take, you know, root. I think the other thing that we heard or learned from the Accenture presentation was, and I think the terminology that actually the presenter used, like everybody wants to do the sexy things, you know, but there's really a few fundamental things that we need to nail when it comes to becoming a skill-based organization that often aren't so sexy. You know, how do we really set a clear vision for what it means to become a skill-based organization? How do we gather or pull together credible data that really helps us to understand the skills of our current employee population, to figure out where those gaps currently exist? So I think there's a lot of kind of groundwork that needs to be laid in order to really move into this idea of becoming a skills-based organization. But, you know, I do think that it's probably an evolution that a lot of our organizations will be, you know, looking to do, so that we, you know, move more towards that reskilling and upskilling as opposed to that de-skilling that I talked about.
Yeah, it's a big undertaking. Well, that's all the questions I think that came in. I want to thank everybody for joining us today. A copy of the webcast will be posted to our website, so please share it with others in your organization. We have a couple last events coming up in 2023. So on November 29th, we have a webcast plan, which Brad will share out some insights from a recent working group he did on succession planning. And then on December 7th, we'll have a terrific research benchmarking study that our CAHRS Mylars have done, sharing out the results of their semester-long project that talks about the cultural implications of flexible work models. And I know many of our organizations are talking about that. So please visit the CAHRS website often to stay current on our events. Share with others in your organization who may be interested. Thanks for joining, and we hope to see you at a future CAHRS event.
Thanks, everyone.